Question you'll get in a few seconds.
It's time to resume. Last session. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The panels are getting more efficient as we get towards the end. The panel is already there and ready and mic'd up. To be congratulated. Panel 11, case studies in the successful application of dynamic alignment principles to supply chain design and operation, and lessons learned from the case studies. The chair of this panel is Deborah Ellis, who is a principal with Gattorna Alignment Proprietary Limited in Sydney. Thank you, Deborah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Second last panel. We up here have decided that if Annette Clayton can have breakfast with her panel, afternoon tea, anyone after afternoon tea should have at least wine. So, you know, we're just waiting to see if it turns up. But in the meantime, we probably should get on with it. But we're not sure the supply chain is quite that flexible. So this panel is about alignment, and I guess you probably think that these last 2 days have been about alignment, and in many ways that's correct, because I think you'll see that the underpinning framework that sits in John's mind is very much this shape, and it's quite appropriate that this is the second last panel and that the last panel is conscious capitalism, because I think together we think that these pieces start to sum up where supply chain is and can be right now. So we have titled this around case studies, and I think that's what people are mainly interested in is we have great concepts, but what do they look like on the ground? And we've got a very appropriate panel, I think, to bring out the various dimensions of that through case studies and through stories. Because, you know, those from academia, I think, will tell you that what a case study is a story. It's a story that in itself gives evidence, and one case study alone doesn't tell the a whole story, but once they are pieced together over time, they start to form a way to understand and interpret an opportunity or a problem. So the panel, let me introduce them. I like to introduce them because I can say things that they probably wouldn't say themselves. And you've already met them, some of them, on previous panels, but let me just quickly run through it again. And stop looking at the slide you're meant to look at next that snuck up on me. Okay, it can stay there. So we have next to me two of the warriors of this business, the alignment business, and Stuart and Jonathan. And, you know, these are the guys on the ground who are making some of these opportunities happen. They're the ones that are brave enough to take the great ideas that John has written about and to start turning them into reality. We've talked a lot about leadership. You've heard Annette Clayton speak, and you'd call her in Schneider the champion of this concept of tailored supply chains that they've adopted. But this is the guy who has to deliver. And, you know, we all know that that's a difficult and sometimes thankless task, and takes a lot of time and energy. So Stuart from Schneider is tasked with delivering on this concept of tailored supply chains, and he has a network modelling team, and he has operational responsibilities that allow him to do it. And not only that, he has a history. He has a history of being able to do this successfully in DHL in 2 countries, and I think it's influenced much of his work ever since. So not only a devotee, but a practitioner, an achiever in this area. Next we have Jonathan, and you've already heard of some of the work that Jonathan's doing recently And this is not a long story. It's not, you know, the 10-year transformation. This is a short and successful and powerful story of what good leadership can do in a short time. And Jonathan is that good leadership. We've got Sander, and like me, Sander is a consultant. We work across organisations and observe organisations, and he's not part of this network that of people who've worked with John's ideas for a long time. He's coming from a different perspective, and that's always important. It's always important to have that different perspective of what alignment, in this case, what does alignment look like to him, and what are good cases of alignment. And I think it's great to start taking that different angle. Next, we've got Carlos Bremer from Brazil, and Carlos also has history and also significant change initiation. Carlos and his partner had a business called Axia Consulting, started as two people, I believe, in Brazil only a few years ago, amongst other things, but one of their strong key parts of their armoury was the dynamic alignment approach. John worked with them. They did some fabulous work, some of which Carlos will talk about, and within a very short period had a team of 100 consultants, and now have been acquired by Ernst Young, and you know, all of that great work in a very short time has had a lot of very positive impacts, and Carlos will show you some really interesting and diverse cases from that period. And next we have Roddy Martin. Roddy's come from most recently Accenture, but a history of being an influencer. He's a voice that many of us have heard, and he's been telling us a very consistent story for a long time about listening to the customer, about demand sensing, about customer-centric, and you would have to say has influenced the agenda in this space. And he will talk broadly about those things that underpin much of what we are doing here. So I'm going to kick off by telling half of the audience something a little bit more about alignment, because I know half of you haven't had a chance to read John's book yet. The other half, I don't believe you actually went back and read it last night. So I'm treating you as probably the half that have been exposed to the ideas somewhere along the line already. And I think that's about roughly how it falls out. So let me very quickly try and encapsulate this thick book and this 25 years of history that sits behind that book in a very short space. Firstly, by linking to the first panel, the design thinking panel that kicked all of this off. If you were to look at the ideas that we're working with, where they would fit is described very well by Roger Martin in his book Design Thinking. Fabulous small book, came out a couple of years ago. And this is probably my favourite diagram because it tells me what I'm doing, you know, and it's always useful to find those things that tell you what you're doing after you've been doing it for 20 years. But what this says is that out in the world that we're all working in, there's all these, what he calls mysteries, things that are going on, customer needs, unmet opportunities floating out there in the market or in a social situation. And they remain mysteries until somebody starts connecting dots and seeing a way to put good ideas together that might create something new. And that putting it together is he calls a heuristic. It's a way of pulling out some of the mysteries out there and putting them together. So McDonald's case, it was cars versus need for dinner quickly on the way home, and this idea of speed and coming together. The first time, that was a great one-person restaurant. It was a heuristic. It was a concept. It was a way for people to quickly have dinner on their way home from work. The first McDonald's restaurant wasn't a heuristic. It was about what happens when you repeat a good formula. What about happens when you find a way to solve a problem and then you start to find a pattern to it and then you start to build some rules around it, and that is what he'd call a heuristic. The next point, though, is that that heuristic needs to be turned into an algorithm, needs to become repeatable, and that's the point you move down the experience curve and you become efficient and you bring costs down and you become predictable and reliable, and the hamburger comes out in 33 seconds and it always tastes the same. So that progression from solving a great idea, whether it be, you know, how do you put music and a telephone together and make it sexy, to how do you turn it into the most profitable business in the world, is the path from mystery to algorithm, and that's, you know, the way we view design thinking. So where we'd position alignment in that, dynamic alignment, and John's ideas, is as a heuristic. Where we'd position what Stuart and Jonathan are doing and the clients that Carlos have worked with is the algorithm. They're turning it from the great concept that it is into something solid and repeatable that's going to give long-term value. And I think, as John has said, there's nothing quite as practical as a good concept. So this is the starting point for alignment. What the very base of this model, very basics of this, brings together so much of what you heard on the last panel and what you've heard on many of the panels here, that, you know, if you're going to compete in a market, then you've got to have appropriate strategies. They have to be strategies that lined up, strategies that meet a need, strategies that satisfy. But as Georgia told us, 70% of strategy doesn't actually get delivered. It gets leaked out by cultural misfit, discomfort, wrong systems, wrong processes, all of that stuff. So if you're going to deliver that strategy, you need appropriate culture. The single most important influence on internal culture and capability is leadership. Thus, putting the work together, and this was essentially the core piece of history that put the work of John in marketing, logistics, and the team had gathered around him in culture and leadership when that all happened 25 years ago, and I was there, and it was a fabulous period of time. When all of that was put together, you got and came up with the core alignment model, a very, very simple model that tells us what all of the academic papers and all of the books we've read tell us, this same core message. But when you put it together, it becomes so much simpler and more powerful. We started working with this core model, and we were trying to work out what are the strategies that we should have. What are the strategies? Here's our marketplace, you know, we're a big brewer and we're going to all of these different customers, and what's our core strategy? The problem we hit was that we had customers over here who would respond to one core strategy and customers over here that would respond to a different one. Which is right? The inevitable result of that is to sit in the middle, isn't it? It's to compromise. And that's so much of our operation is that. It's a compromise. It's not quite what they want, not quite what they want, but it's something in the middle. And thus, what we tend to do is design this one-size-fits-all around the middle. So in our consulting assignments, we found that we had to start to think differently. We had to start breaking down the marketplace and start to work with different customers in different ways. But of course, that's a problem, because if you do that, you end up customising. So what we found was what marketers had known all the time. You need to segment. You need market segmentation for supply chains and for big strategies, not just for brands and not just for positioning. So what we learned was that we had to go out and find a way to talk to customers and find a way to put them into segments that meant something about the supply chain. And once we did that, it became so much easier. it became so much easier to understand what strategies work where and what to do and how to align, and alignment became a much more practical tool, but also it had very serious implications. Implications you've heard about and John's talked about today and other people have talked about for organisation design, for leadership and for strategy, but also the things that support strategy, the systems and processes that sit behind it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and you don't need to read every point, but I want to introduce you to the 5 most common supply chain types that we see. They're not all of them, and you'll see when Jonathan talks about his work, he will talk about some others. But these are the 5 most common you see, and you'll probably recognise them. That difficult in the middle red customer who's changing and volatile demand, and if you did a coefficient of variation on his demand, it would be enormous, versus on the left, the blue, more stable customers and more predictable demands, versus over on the right, the one-off events or the new product launch, and then the project, a new area that we've realised needs its own special attention. And from that, and when you read the book, the 50% of you haven't read it last night, what you'll see is that there's a different supply chain response that's inferred from all of those different segments. And we've learnt over the years a huge amount about lean, and lean has been refined, but our proposition is that lean doesn't fit everywhere. That in some cases, agile is the right response, where there's an opportunity, there's a market, there's a fast-moving situation, you're in Indonesia and you've got micro markets opening at 5 a day, then you need an agile supply chain. If you're building a FLNG plant in 450 kilometres off the coast of Australia, you need a project supply chain for your construction stage. So this is I'm showing you the sort of terminology that we're using, but it's not the only terminology, and Sander and Roddy, they have their own terminology for this world, but it is this core concept of alignment. So that's my, I guess, introduction to the topic, and now I guess we go to the real hard work of, what does it look like on the ground and how does it feel on the ground? And I'll hand it over to the warriors.
Thank you. So thanks, Debs, for the introduction. I'm going to quote John's book for everyone that's not read it so far. But in here, alignment is a business transformation. And I think that's the most important thing that everybody needs to recognise. And time and patience is certainly a factor that's required, because it is a rewiring of the business. Its processes, its ITs, its systems. And again, we talked a little bit about this with project logistics yesterday, or campaign as John refers to it. It's a real reset of skill sets and competencies within the organisation too. So the people dimension and the need to upskill and invest in existing resources and attract the right resources is critical to the reorganisation that's being done. Now, I've had the privilege of not just working in Schneider where I am today, which is a fantastic organisation, but also with DHL Express, and there's a slightly different approach to each one. When I was at DHL Express under Roger Crook's leadership and working with this young man beside me, although we're getting greyer and older together, is we took it from a commercial. So we really were the front force of the sales organisation. We recognised that we needed to manage our customers differently, but also customers were demanding different services, products, and packages, if you wish, about how we presented those services. So the challenge we had was recognising those customer demands, systematising the solutions, and then delivering it, and that meant aligning with the operations community back through the front office as well. Now in Schneider, under Annette Clayton's leadership, we've taken the word alignment, if you wish, and we're calling it tailored supply chains. And one of the things Schneider's been very well recognised for is each of the industry segments, we strive to be number 1 or 2 in each of the markets we are with those industry segments. And we're recognised for the great quality of the product. We're recognising for our manufacturing standards and our processes within there, and indeed our TPM or our SPS, Schneider Production System, modelled under Toyota, is recognised as one of the best or greatest lean processes out there. What we weren't doing well was the actual delivery to the customers. So it really forced the leadership, and that's Jean-Pascal and then Annette, to recognize we needed to reconnect with our customers. And we've gone out and reconnected that using the research tools that John provides to really understand what it is that our customers want, so we can begin to systematize back through the supply chain how we respond to that demand. Now, we're in the early days of it here in Schneider. We're nearly, well, I've only coming up on about 3 years in the organization, but we're starting to feel a transformational change, as John shared earlier on. We've gone through the Pacific. We had the pleasure of Thibaut sharing the learnings of the collaborative supply chain down in the Pacific, and we've now migrated through China, through Brazil. We've now completed India, phase 1 of Europe, and we'll complete North America next month. But the most important thing is we're maturing in our learning at that same time. It's not just the maturing of the learning of the organization, but it's the learning of the customers, and again, how can we leverage the solutions that we're needing to drive across the organization. What we found in DHL is we had sustainable business growth, and it was also a vehicle to lower operational costs through a systematized product and service offering. In Schneider, what's really coming through at the moment in the work that we've done is an improvement in our customer satisfaction scores. Our delivery, where we were sort of number 1, number 2, number 3 is a detractor. This is where your customers are speaking negatively of you. We're starting to see that move down to a number 5 globally at the moment. Other markets, it's better than that. But we're getting the best on-time delivery to customer that we're seeing as an organization. And we're now getting an organization to recognize that we need to change how we measure customer satisfaction and what we're looking for. As a consequence of this research, we've re-engineered last mile delivery in terms of what we need to do in the strategy towards it, but we're now focusing on our DCs. So our distribution centers, before each was unique to each geography. We're now bringing a systematized approach to that. So what does a lean DC look like? And our lean DCs very much satisfy a local for local demand and our high runners. What does an agile DC look like? What does a agile DC look like? And in project logistics, quite often we're working in or needing to work in an environment of virtual DCs. So this whole process really does become a guidebook that takes you through a journey of learning, but it's a learning that allows you to structure the response to your demand chain and your customers, but drive a systematized response to it at the same time in terms of each of the touch points that we come across within the organization. We've seen efficiencies we've been able to get, particularly through digitization, which again, digesting that information means that we've built tools where we can take the customer research, we can take the data that we're able to mine from the organization, and again, we've been able to move more rapidly through the organization as we've learned how to mine this, and we're then able, through network modeling, to really put together a solution which allows us to communicate not just to our front office, but also to our customers and critical functions in between. That helps transformation. I mean, I think we would like to move faster, but we've got to also recognize it's a big enterprise that we're also needing to coach and support through change. We're also recognizing that in the services that we're delivering, we're having to invest more and more in training. Going from an organization that didn't have digitization in logistics before, didn't have the functionalities that leading edge WMS or transportation management systems offer, means we've got to invest in those people and train them and bring them up. So it's a real focus for us. And then lastly, I'd just like to talk about the importance of suppliers. And certainly in the field of logistics, when I first turned up at Schneider, Kuehne Nagel had effectively fired Schneider as a customer. My first meeting with the CEO of Schenker was basically, "Work with you anymore." And Roger Crook was at DHL and said, "Well, Stuart, I like you, so we'll keep the rates for the next year, but if you keep up this way, we won't want to work with you either." And we've had to go through a real mindset change with our suppliers, and I'm pleased here the last couple of days. So with the guys from Damco, DHL, FedEx, Manhattan, Oracle, Penske, SDV, Exact, Lamasoft, and Solvoyo. Omar, I haven't forgotten you from the early days. These guys have also helped us in this journey, and I think that's really my last part, is this transformation journey is not just everybody into, it is working with these suppliers and working very closely with there too. That gives you some insights there, Deb.
Sure does.
So you get part two of me. So I'll put a little bit more meat on the bone. As I've mentioned, DKSH are an intermediary between clients on one side, which are the brand owners that entrust us to distribute their product, and then customers on the other side. You'll see our business model. We've been through a transformation in terms of our operating model. And on the left at the top, you'll see we have business development where we go and find new clients. When we manage our clients, we manage a supply chain and a service center. And then on the front end, we have a field sales organization, a key account organization, and then field marketing, which does merchandising. So what we have to do, we have to manage across this entire operating model. And so how did we go about this? So what we had to do was, the first thing to go into this process, we worked with John's team. We actually did a questionnaire of the customers and clients and find out where they fitted into the process. So so there's really four types, and it comes around this. There is a relationship group, which is really the collaborative guys. Then there's what we called fair deal. These were guys that have some collaboration but are very heavily driven by the cost of things and the value proposition. Then a pragmatic group, which are a bit more agile but still have a very close view on cost. And then the last group were innovate quickly, which were the retailers that really are very fashion driven, they're very seasonal, they have a lot of specialist products. So these were the four teams we had on the customer side, but we also found that the same behaviors were exhibited when we did the client analysis. And so the clients and the customers were put into these different teams. And then we profiled our workforce. So we had a supply chain team, and in Thailand we have about 30 or 40 leaders. It's a massive supply chain. And we put them through a Myers-Briggs, and we found out where they would best be suited. And then we challenged these teams to have one or two customers, 2 or 3 key clients, and then they would start working with those. They'd meet them once a month, and they'd actually start developing projects. And so the teams were aligned with their customers and with their clients, and they started to build projects for the cluster that they were managing. In terms of the initiatives that came out of it, we were very keen to really get something done. I believe that action I always believe in the retroactive to write strategy after you've done it, rather than write it before you've done it. But some of the typical initiatives that came out of this were, we mentioned it on the last panel, weekend order processing, which didn't seem like a revolution, but clearly was. A lot of our bulkier product, beverage, paper products, etc., we were losing a lot of money putting it through too many nodes in the supply chain. So we started to drive straight from manufacturing sites straight to our customers. We were worried about this because we thought we'd lose the value proposition, because if we're not handling it, what are we doing? But the client nor the customer seemed to mind, so we saved a lot of money doing that and improved inventory and service level. Scheduled deliveries, I mentioned before, for ABC, massive service improvement. And then when we were with the customers, and even with some of the clients, we were able to actually use their transportation, so use backhauling. And one of our customers actually cites, we took 100,000 kilometers off the road in Thailand by backhauling, and they're saying this is a green initiative, because obviously it's good for the environment, so a lot less empty trucks driving around. I mentioned before leveraging customers' infrastructure, so we share infrastructure in these tri-party programs. So a lot of initiatives came out of that and really segmented where we were. Just a couple of lessons that we've learned in this process, and I said this is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. You'll see from the different customers and clients, segmentation around industry type. You'll see 3 or 4 beverage suppliers in there, but they behave differently. So I think, and that's the same on the customer, you'll see two hypermarket customers that have very different behavioral types. And so an assessment that says, well, we think this customer has to be this way won't work. You have to really talk to them. Obviously, the two groups that the two in the middle, the two groups which are really on the pragmatic and the fair deal, were the ones we got the most work done. And I think the reason for this was because we were typically dealing with these guys that wanted to save money and drive value, and we wanted to as well. So, what surprised me was the guys on the top left, the collaborative ones, took a little bit more time and were probably a bit more about relationship and not getting the job done. The success in this model, we were really only dealing with the supply chain leaders, and now, as I've said, we've started to bring more commercial and other functions into that. And there's only so much you can do in supply chain. You have to get this to a bigger business population. And I think that this model, just to finish it, as I said, we started this new operating model with more customer focus. This program really helped our supply chain people to be customer focused. So that was the lessons I learned from that. Thank you.
Sander, over to you to step outside the paradigm we've put ourselves in and say, what does alignment look like to you?
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody here. So, my name is Sander Veenstra. I lead the supply chain strategy team of Deloitte in Amsterdam, focusing on all aspects of supply chain, plan, source, make, deliver. Personally, my focus is on supply chain network design and optimization, using tools like Lamasoft, as shown before, and doing that mostly in the fast-moving consumer industry. Companies like Heineken, Coca-Cola, Mattel, Nike, and I'd like to use this opportunity to take the example of Nike and take two observations on alignment and how they've tried to achieve or improve that alignment going forward. Because if you take Nike as a company, it's as one of the bigger fashion apparel companies out there. Basically, if they manufacture a shoe today, it's already clear where that shoe is going to end up, in which channel. Is that going to be the retail channel, the accounts that they have, that they service? Is this going to be a Nike store, flagship, a city center? Is this going to be a Nike factory store, which is an outlet, different value proposition? Or is this going to go direct to consumer, where even that consumer already today has the opportunity to order their own shoe online and customize it? So, in a sense, they've built that supply chain already to match the different segments that they have today. But now the challenge is that the market is shifting back to the model that omni-channel, or the way that they see it, the integrated marketplace, or the seamless consumer experience that they're trying to achieve, is basically forcing them to step away from this segmentation, this supply chain channels that they already have built today, which in a sense is the one step back, two steps forward that they're trying to achieve. So each of these channels today have very different buying behavior. So again, then it's the question, what are you trying to achieve? Because if I talk to my salesperson selling to retail, they will say that retail external party is the most important party. They have to ship there. If I've got that one hot item, my own Nike store will say, this is the traffic generator. We need to have that in our store. So I need to have this. Digital consumer, same thing. This is the end consumer. This is what we're doing it for. So different buying behaviors, all finding themselves, of course, equally important as part of the supply chain fulfillment and allocation. So if you then take a look at this objective, this new strategy that they have on seamless consumer or customer experience that they're trying to achieve. Basically, this means that they first have to break down the walls within their own supply chain today. So where they now have an allocation of stock through these different channels, they have to take away that allocation. Where they have inventory that is specific to retail, that is specific to their Nike stores, that is protected, they have to take that away. Which is a challenging and an interesting step that they have to make going forward. And it's away from silos, but then from a different definition of that silos that you would have if you look at the silos within the organization traditionally. That also means that the way you're then going to govern your supply chain and that you're going to do the true segmentation to achieve seamless experience is going to be much different. It's not enforced by supply chain structure. It's not enforced by the stock lying in a certain warehouse. It has to be enforced by governance. It has to be enforced by how people respond. And of course, it's a difficult question because it will be down to that question that says, if I have that one product, everybody wants to have it, how am I going to decide where to allocate it. I think this is where, in the end, analytics and all of the great tools will play a great role, because if I look 10 years back and I look at the supply chain optimization projects we did back then, the answer was always trucks and sheds. It's where do you put your warehouse, where do you put your production location? Today, when we get a question from a client on how to optimize their supply chain, the answer is capabilities. It's what do my people need to be able to do, which systems do I need to have to drive insights to make the right decisions. And yes, there's somewhere around it also, which stock do I need to have and how quickly do I need to be able to deliver to the marketplace. So I think that's where traditional analytics capabilities break down. So the 80-20 that we used to use for basic segmentation doesn't work anymore, because you have to segment across geographies. I mean, in China, am I going to for the major city, am I going to go for the backland, and how important do I feel about that? If I talk about inventory deployment, am I going to put all my stock close to the big markets or also close to the outliers in the market? So there's a lot of dimensions of segmentation, and you need very smart analytics to drive the insights. So, and I think those are the two main important elements I want to start off with. So, firstly, it's a transformation. It's the one step back, two steps forwards, which is not easy for our clients to do. It's stepping away from what you have, even though already it was a good step towards segmentation and alignment. If your market is changing, you have to transform it to a new setting. And also, it's away from that static answer, it's the capabilities.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we're starting to appreciate that our jobs setting up strategy aren't as they used to be, that we've done the 5-year plan and walk away. We're setting strategy, adjusting, setting, adjusting, and we're basically much more agile. Our requirement as practitioners and managers is actually shifting on our spectrum across to the right, and the speed of our activity is changing as well. So thanks, Sander, for that. Carlos, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. And thank you, John, for giving me the opportunity to share with you some cases that we have been working the last almost 10 years already. So I brought 4 cases here. I will try to go through them very fast. One of them, John has already mentioned, which is the meat producer in Brazil. So what we did, we mapped 1,000 farmers in the region to prove to the procurement people that they don't behave in the same way. And in fact, just 19% of them were really looking for price. Most of them were looking for relationship, but the buyers just visit them every 3 months. So they said, come here, ask for lower prices, so I want to have a coffee with him and so on. So we divided into 4 segments. We implemented in that region with quite successful. And one of the people that were part of the project, in fact, left the company and started a trading company using full the model. I asked him to present here, but he didn't allow me because he's getting really a lot of success of using the model of segmentation. And that's how he's helping making this link between producers and sellers of red meat. The other case, which is my biggest case, is the largest steel producer in Brazil. They called us in 2005, 2006. Roddy will understand it very well, to implement APO, because they were having a lot of problems between customer service, inventory, and capacity utilization. And we said, maybe it's not the problem, the system. Right? So we did a 10 weeks diagnosis. And the feedback was quite interesting, because we said, first of all, you have a very interesting segmentation and prioritization, but do you know how your orders are translated into production in the SAP system? So we don't know. It's first in, first out. So all the logic that you build up here in marketing and sales is not translated into the system. But why nobody told me that? Because for production guys, it's fantastic, because in fact, they organize the orders and in achieving the highest productivity. So they organize the orders to have the highest ton per hour, ton per man. And in the logistics, we went down to ask the people, so how do you load the trucks? How do you prioritize? It's here is very easy. We talked about first in, first out, and said, we don't know. We know another 2 methods. Fish, which is first in, still here. So there are orders that are already here 60 days and nobody asked for them anymore. And the CFO, so scream in, first out. So the salespeople called me on my cell phone, I load it, and that's how we work. So just 90% of the orders were manually entered in the system, in the very large organization. So what we did is, before talking about APO, we did a 1,600 customers interview to represent the whole logic, and about 75% were not asking for a delivery on day. They were happy if you deliver on Monday to Friday. So we call this delivery week. Another percentage said, I need on the day, because I use it as I put my construction. So we call delivery day, and the rest was fast response. So mainly distributors that when they call, they really need the product on time, so or as fast as possible. So we split it in 3 segments. And we put this then finally on APO, which is the planning module of SAP. There is a sub-module called back order processing. And this back order processing organizes the order in the way the market and the salespeople wanted to have. So they run twice a day, this back order processing, reorganizing the whole orders to fit better to the market. So that's what we did here, and it's working very well. And they are finally using SAP, so well, SAP works. So this is another case, so it's an alignment, not using the PADI, but in another way, but it's the same idea of alignment. And there are other 2 for smaller companies where it get really personal. So one is automotive suppliers, a family business. And the father was the founder. He was a former GM guy. So he started the business and also selling for OEMs and distributions. And then he brought the son to be part of the business. So the son was already nominated as the next CEO. He was the COO. And they were struggling a lot about how to fulfill this market, distributors and OEMs. And so what we did 2 maps or 2 analyses. One was about the segments. So what does OEM want and what does the distributor want? And we also mapped them on their own behavior. So we used MBTI. I don't know if you know MBTI, but it is a way to map your preferences as a behavior. And in fact, the father was a relationship guy, and the son was the opposite, was a result-oriented guy. The father loved the distribution people because he had the relationship and hated the OEMs. And the son that was result-oriented loved the OEMs, but hated the distributors. And we explain it's not because you love or not, because your preference is to serve OEM as a son and the distributor as a father. As they understood that, so they stopped to fight and said, okay, we have to serve both. And what they did, they reduced the inventory for the OEMs and increased it for the distributors, but decreasing the lead time. And they achieved within 6 months a higher profit and a higher market share. So it's very successful, not just on the business side, but also on the family side. And last but not least, also a ceramic tile franchise. Also is the largest sales store in Brazil. They sell more than $20 million in one store on ceramics. It's quite big for Brazil. It's a pair. And they were growing, and the owner of the ceramic tile factory, in fact, called me, said, so, Carlos, you always talk about people, so can you help these customers, because I have a very good link to them, and they are breaking the business and the marriage. So they are now getting divorced because of the problems in the company. So I did the same. I helped them to first make their own MBTI. The husband was typical German guy, discipline, oriented, focused, and the woman was Brazilian, And I first asked, please read your own report. Oh, it seems like magic. How they discover my profile, just putting here some things. Now read from your husband and wife. Oh, exactly my wife. Oh, my husband. And then she said, so the problem is not my husband. It's his profile. I said, exactly. And she brought a wonderful example. Said every Friday they had a farm, and she called him on Thursday. So let us go to the farm. And he asked, at what time? with car, with what car? And she, what does it matter, the time on the car? So, and then she understood that to decide, he needed information because he was a STJ guy. And she was an FNP guy, a woman. And then also brought this idea of, okay, diversity is not gender, it's also profile. And this diversity was the key element to make the business grow and became the problem. And as they realized it, we gave them different roles according to their profile. And they used this to train the salespeople in the store to learn physical behaviors from the customers, to understand if they were intuitive and how to sell. So intuitive people, they use the hands to, can you explain me? And the opposite, can you explain me? And they understood how to sell because of the behavior of the customers in the store. So these are some cases. We are still working very strong with the alignment idea, but mostly based on people. So people is really the key element. And I hope in the next panel I will also tell about the next level of people understanding. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. I think John and I, in our consulting, had a similar experience. You find these really interesting, often we've had some experience of very early stage IT companies, and the individuals, it's all about the individuals. And they're growing at this rapid rate, and it's because of the individuals, but the individuals are also what's going to hold them back. So, that power of, whether those key relationships work is so important, isn't it? So, thanks, Carlos. Roddy.
Sure, thank you very much. And what you see up here is a framework that hopefully will give you some context to, I think, a lot of the statements and discussions that we've heard here. A little bit about my background. I came from SAB Miller, the SAB part of SAB Miller, which was obviously South African breweries. And we went through some fairly significant change, as you heard Pat talk about, as South Africa went from a very internally focused brewing industry to number 2 in the world. And then I left South Africa to join AMR Research to build the supply chain practice. And what I realized was if we were going to do research around how do you become a demand-driven supply network or supply chain or value network, I realized it was about a journey. And you can't write one report where one size fits all. It doesn't make any sense because companies are at different stages of capability. So I put together what we'd learned at South African breweries, which was different sites, different levels of automation, different cultures, different levels of skills. How do you measure capability? And I came up and started to develop this 5-stage maturity model, which I've continued to develop, and those of you who read the Gattorna research will see they've written a pretty good report, which I was involved with behind the scenes. But I want to take you through this maturity model, and I'm going to give some examples of companies who are in various places and hopefully put down some of the context around this journey. You heard Pat talk about a journey. You heard Maeve talk about it's not a one-size-fits-all, but it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy in any case. So let's look at stage 1, right? So stage 1 is a reactive supply chain. I never saw the problem coming, and oh my gosh, we ran out of product. Oh my gosh, we've got too much stuff. The contract manufacturers are typically in stage 1 because nobody tells them. They I did some research into contract manufacturers, and they'll tell you, they phoned us the day before and said, hey, can you just double the order? No ways we can't double the orders. It takes us 5 days to package this material. So stage 1 is reactive. Stage 2 is project-orientated improvement. In other words, everything is built into projects. You see a lot of this in the engineering organizations. So it's an inventory optimization project or a design optimization project for the network or a quality management project. But these are project silos. And to the point that Clive made, and we had a long discussion, and this is the projects are often disconnected. So why is it that I often talk to C-level executives and they'll say, hell, all the project managers tell us the project's going well, but why don't I see a change in the business results? Well, the reason is you've got all these projects that are all delivering independently, but they're not necessarily contributing to the overall capabilities of the organization. So that's stage 2. Stage 3 is functional excellence. So what you typically find is that an organization says, wow, we've got supplier quality, manufacturing quality, customer quality. Why don't we put one big quality management initiative together? Or why don't we put an S&OP project together that pulls together planning for sales and planning for operations? But it's just a bigger silo. So stages 1, 2, and 3 is go from reacting to project silos to functional silos. Then you get to stage 4, and by the way, there's a really big global consumer goods company that calls that thick red line the Roddy line, because it is incredibly difficult to jump from stage 3 to stage 4. Stage 4 is end-to-end process starting with the buyer of your product. Now, you can imagine that if I'm organized and improving the performance of my business in functional silos, to suddenly flip the switch and say, by the way, all our metrics are focused on on-shelf availability, as you heard with Procter & Gamble. So now all of the functions have to align and say, well, we've got to balance all our KPIs and all our metrics and all our measures to make sure that we're all balanced in our approach to driving on-shelf availability. That's an incredibly difficult jump to go from 3 to 4. And I'll give you some examples of companies. Then stage 5 is it's all about value to all members of the network. Now, let's talk about, I benchmarked 55 companies. So I developed a questionnaire when I was with the last company, and we looked at 55 companies. The industry average is 2.4. It's probably moved on a little bit, but that says most companies are improving their supply chain performance as a set of projects. And they will tell you our strategy is, well, we got a project management office. Well, you know what? A project management office doesn't necessarily tie stuff together. There are many companies in stage 3. I'll give a couple of good examples. Dell used to be a high 3. Colgate-Palmolive is a 3. General Mills in the United States is a 3. When you go and analyze what actually happens in 3, it's this IT machine that I reflected on earlier. Well, everything is going to be solved by our integrated ERP system. No ways. Because the integrated ERP system is an order-to-cash process. It's not an outside-in demand-driven set of processes. It's an inside-out optimization of all my business functions. Now, does that make the ERP vendors bad? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that to go from 3 to 4, we have to think fundamentally differently about information, processes, people, and organization. And those companies that have crossed that line, the P's and G's, the Samsungs, the Amazons, they organize fundamentally differently. So in 2 and 3, we always talked about, well, you can disconnect information flow from material flow. That's fine. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to revolutionize the business. But when you go from 3 to 4, you disconnect information flows, you optimize information flows, you optimize product flows, but you don't disconnect them. And so companies that are successful in stage 4, like the P&Gs who drove the whole business change by saying, well, we care about 2 things. Products available, we understand why consumers buy our product. If you go to Amazon, I use the example, I'm a prime Amazon customer. I buy every supply chain book that comes out. A week before the book's published, I get an email from Amazon. When the book is published, they ship the book to my nearest DC. I haven't even placed the order yet. And why? Because they want to get it to me in 12 hours, and they do. They get that book to me in 12 hours because it's already sitting in a DC when I place my order. So predictive analytics. Now, the big data that you heard this morning or yesterday that wasn't really clear to a lot of people, how does that influence the supply chain? If I'm not organized in a set of balanced end-to-end processes with clear roles and responsibilities, the right levels of analytics in stage 4, there's absolutely no ways I can be flexible enough to leverage these digital capabilities. So I gave the example earlier of Walmart and Merck. So they share pollen data, they share weather data, They're collectively mining Facebook to see what people are saying about allergies in different parts of the United States. They then agree collaboratively, there's going to be a burst of ragweed breaking out in Boston because of the weather pattern, and so we better move all our Claritin for ragweed to Boston. And they have saved tens of millions of dollars as a result of that proactive predictive analytics in the supply chain. So the point of the case study is, and let's go to a few words that we've been tossing around. Alignment. Well, I'll tell you, alignment in 2 is different to alignment in 3, and it's different to alignment in 4. Does it mean that 2 is bad? No. Someone will ask the question, why can't I jump from 2 to 4? Well, because you build capabilities in 3. 2 is project alignment within the project. 3 is functional alignment. 4 is end-to-end process alignment. I care about on-shelf availability and why the consumer is buying my product. So alignment evolves in these stages of capability. Talk about John's segmentation. And he absolutely broke the paradigm of segmentation because he said, you evolve your capabilities towards segmentation and towards this demand-driven. If you're in 2, it doesn't help to go through a fancy segmentation strategy. You won't know what to do with it. But if you're in 4, and you're organized from the customer back, and you can now characterize relationship with the customer, you can characterize predictability of demand, you can ask yourself, is this a replenishment supply chain? Is this a lean supply chain? Is this a flexible supply chain? And is this an agile supply chain? Well, guess what? Those are 4 different supply chains. So the point of this model, and it's really interesting because every single time I take this into a C-level presentation, the executives absolutely get stuck on this. They're like, I'm taking this to the CEO because we've never looked at the world like this. And you can actually listen to the language within 10 minutes, and you'll say, that company's in 2, or that company's in 3, or that company's in 4. And those companies, I made the point this morning about what characterizes supply chain leaders is visionary leaders who influence. Guess what I've seen? The leader is one step ahead of the organization in understanding the capabilities. And they're pulling the organization through a 3 or a 2. And I saw this in the years that I was involved in P&G. The leaders were already thinking in 4 terms, even though the organization was in 2 and 3 terms. And by the way, different parts of the business could be in different stages of maturity, different geographies, different functions. It's complex. And so can you imagine how on earth did we do this without some codified way of measuring capability? And so that's my closing point is when you go into companies like Procter & Gamble, DuPont, SAB Miller, these companies that have systemized transformation of the end-to-end business over many years, they have a codified way of talking about this, this capability. So for example, DuPont has a center of excellence that goes out and assesses different parts of the organization on a quarterly basis. And they'll set a goal. Let's say they go to Europe and they see a portion of the DuPont organization is at a 3.1. I'll say, well, your goal is to get to a 3.4 within the next year. And then they track their performance against that level of maturity. And if there's no movement, the CEO gets with the head of supply chain onto a plane and they go and say, what's the problem? Do you need resources? Have you missed the point? Can we help you?
Thank you, Roddy. I knew that at some point I'd have to do it.
So you had the glass ready.
No, I had to be creative. I was thinking. You've heard very different versions, but I think they fit together and there's a story to be had. But I'd like to turn it over to the audience now. And I'd like either questions for the panel or comments about good cases of alignment. Over here.
I would like to place a question to the panel, but especially to Stuart, that he pointed out he transformed his marketing approach from a platform fits all sizes to a platform that is more customized depending on customer needs. which means that customers are willing to share data and gives you the chance, study the needs, and revert with a customized solution. With this question, I would like to take the chance and make a connection with the country that this global supply chain summit is taking place. It's Greece. In Greece, especially in Piraeus, there is an evolution. There is a totally different port, strong infrastructure, a lot of lines call to the port, warehousing, advanced logistics services, and there is a big multinational account that has followed a model through Piraeus, importing goods from Asia, using the multiple services from Piraeus to other ports of Mediterranean or by rail to middle of Europe. But this is one nice model when other customers may have interest, but the situation in the country makes them to ignore our existence. The financial crisis, the problems, the instability has overlapped this big investment and this big success that because of our geographical position, we may have and have more examples like HP to follow the same model. So, in that difficult situation, what could be the approach to speak out and use such examples to bring new cargoes and new customers into Piraeus?
How did you go with that, Stuart?
I think, well, again, the presentation this morning on Costco. I knew Piraeus when I used to go around the Mediterranean on the deck and go between the islands. I'd not realised what's happened to that port. So I'd actually put it back out. When I listened to customers when I was either at DHL or from being and living in Asia at the moment, which has been part of my life for a long time, if I look at the challenges of how to support Europe and the demands of Europe and that constant challenge between cost and responsiveness to what the marketplace is looking for, I'll put it down to marketing. I wasn't aware of what Piraeus was offering or what Greece was offering. Unfortunately, the world media is very negative towards Greece at the moment, and that's most unfortunate. But to me, this is a marketing opportunity that needs to be leveraged, but also leveraged through the DHLs, SDVs, and Kuehne+Nagels and Panalpinas. You need to get them on board as well in getting it out. They've got the customers, and they're constantly being challenged day on day from a cost and service trade-off. That would be my recommendation there.
I might comment there too. I mean, as you can see, with a very broad model such as alignment, it gives you some guidelines to a large number of situations, including the classic marketing situation. And segmentation, of course, starts with marketing. And we've discovered that you need different communication strategies for different types of customers. The communication that reaches a collaborative customer about we're here for the long term, we're reliable, we're steady, is not the same as the communication for customers where they're looking for a quick response and they want to hear quick messages delivered in a very short time frame and giving them that sense that you can handle their agile requirements. You know, we've seen that you can design the message to target the groups of customers that you think are most likely to respond, or you can put out 4 or 5 different communication strategies all aimed at the same end result, which is to use your port, but designed to fit different parts of the market. Yep. Any other questions? Over here?
Yeah. I'd like to ask Roddy a question. Your very impassioned presentation of your model was interesting, but what struck me about it was you talked about it with a high degree of certainty, and I don't think there is a high degree of certainty in this world. And I don't think, although we use the phrase supply chain, that these things are linear. So cause and effect, that kind of stuff. But the real issue was, I can't remember what you called the line, but for the sake of the Rugby World Cup, let's call it the gain line. When you break the gain line into 4 and 5, wouldn't it be more impactful if the business started to develop its strategy around your supply chain rather than you be in a 4-box matrix?
That's exactly right, by the way. So that's the point of stage 4. In stage 4, business drives the supply chain strategy, which is the business operating model, which in turn drives the IT strategy. That's not what happens in 3. In 3, you've got IT doing their stuff, supply chains doing their stuff in a very linear way. It's a very operations-oriented environment. That's not the case in 4 and 5. So the actual kicker in value comes in 4 and 5.
Yeah, so the people who are in 3 are achievers.
Yes.
And the people who are in 4 and 5 are people who are value creators.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
In fact, just to close that point, the drug in stage 3 is we're using our ERP system to reduce costs. Costs where? In silos?
While we're just getting the microphone, to James, sorry.
James Fortune, Salek, Saudi Arabia. Jonathan, I was interested when you sort of slid through at the start, when you're in the early stages of, you mentioned doing Myers-Briggs on your people. Was that does that confound the experiment that you've already done a sort of restructure of the people in anticipation?
No, we restructured after we'd done the Myers-Briggs. So we did the Myers-Briggs, and we didn't do a very, we didn't make a big deal of it. We just said, we want you to understand one another, so they did the Myers-Briggs. They sat in a group, and they weren't surprised at how each other behaved. And then when we built the teams, we built them based on where they would best fit in the team. So that was done first, so I apologise if
thanks.
But so can I just add a comment about using Myers-Briggs? Some people confuse the profile as you are, and it's not. It's your comfort zone. So that's for you is easy to behave, but you can behave in all other ways. It's just it spends more energy. So if you're a relationship person, it's hard for you to behave as a result-oriented person, but you can do it. So just not to limit people because of their MBTI profile.
Okay. So we have Ralph waiting, and thank you for the questions and for joining with us in this discussion. And thank you very much, my panel. They've been very patient as I've harassed them for comments and bullet points and bios, and it's been a real pleasure to spend the time preparing this with them. So thank you all, and thank you to the panel.
It's a great panel. It could go on forever, but we're out of time. Thank you very much, and well chaired, Deborah. Thank you. Now, the last panel, the very last panel. We've got a couple of other things, but no more panels after this one. It's the impact of conscious capitalism on the design and operation of enterprise supply chains, chaired by Dr. Carlos Bremer from Brazil. We'll come up and get mic'd, please.